Hey, what's going on everyone? So over the last couple of days I've been working on the heads and getting some things figured out and also waiting for some parts to come in. But we finally got everything we need to start reassembly, so let's get to it. So most of the work we've been doing over the last few days has been getting the heads all cleaned up and ready for the rebuild. That includes cleaning up the mating surfaces, like this for the valve cover and the rear for the heads, as well as cleaning out all the orifices for the oil and coolant pass-throughs. We've also been waiting on some parts like that one valve that we needed to replace, as well as these, which are the valve seals that we got from the good people over at Integrated Engineering. You'll notice that they're two different colors. The light blue are for the exhaust system, the maroon are for the intake system. The difference in color is because of a difference in material. The light blue ones are made to handle more heat because they're exposed to more heat. So the first order of business was to get the valve seals installed. So I went ahead and took a head start on that. Next came installing these springs, spring retainers, and of course the valve keepers, which I already know are going to be a pain in the ass. So to get this all done, we're going to leave the spring and retainer installed just like we did. We're going to use a familiar tool from another video to compress the spring and retainer. And then hopefully we'll have enough space to go in with tweezers and install the valve keeper. Hopefully. To further explain to you what we're trying to accomplish here, I'm holding a valve with the spring and the retainer in my hand here. And our goal is to take the tool and compress this enough so that we see the grooves here. These grooves are what holds the valve keepers. Our goal from there is to take the tweezers and one of the retainers and clip it here, and you can see how difficult this is already, and I'm holding it in my hand. So the goal is to grab it, place it here, and have it stay on those grooves. And we got to do that twice per valve. And we have a lot of them. Wish me luck. So with the help of this flashlight here, we're able to see how compressing the spring gave us access to the keeper grooves on the valve. So now the hardest part comes, and that's installing the valve keepers on those grooves. Finally got that on. Damn, that sucked. Alright, time for the next one now. So now we gotta spin this around so that it faces down without knocking it over. And that'll clear up enough space for us to lay the other one on top. I'm gonna definitely do that off camera. It's hard to do this with one hand behind the camera. And yeah. I managed to get the other retainer on. So the goal now is to decompress the spring and hopefully the retainers stay on. And looks like we got good news. It stayed, and this valve is all set. Now we just got to get the rest of them done. Okay, we're finally done, and that took the better part of 2 hours, and it really sucked. I definitely see why people charge a lot of money to get this work done. But now let's move on to installing the cam buckets and the camshafts as well. So the cam bucket install should be pretty simple. We have the big ones for the exhaust cams and the smaller ones for the intake cams. But before we get that done, we're actually going to take this spray bottle that's filled with oil, and we're just going to lubricate all the spots where these cam buckets would be, just to make sure we don't have any excessive friction. And now we'll just load them all in. And that's the last one. And now we'll go ahead and take that spray bottle and then just lubricate the tops as well. So that way we have lubrication for the cam lobes as well for when we install the cams. And now we'll lay in the cams, of course making sure that the exhaust side is on the exhaust side and the same for the intake. Alright, so after a couple failed attempts at installing the cams and the tensioner, we finally got everything in. And I'll just give you guys a quick guide through what happened and how we got to the situation here. So first of all, before we even try to install any of this, you got to install the gasket and the half moon seal that seal up right under the camshaft tensioner here. So you see the half moon seal right in there, and we have the gasket laying flat all the way across where the tensioner puts down pressure. The next thing we have to do is time the camshafts. So there's two timing marks, which are these little notches you see right here. So between the timing notch on the exhaust cam and the intake cam, there needs to be 16 chain links. So once you have that set on a table, you go ahead and just lay those 16 links and make sure the two sprockets are in correctly. You have to go ahead and insert the tensioner between the two cams. That is very difficult. So what I found is that there is a special tool that compresses this tensioner and makes it easier for you to install the tensioner within the two sprockets here. I don't own that tool. So what I did from there was actually use zip ties, and I'll show you what that looks like with one of the tensioners here. So I took a zip tie, fed it through this hole here and all the way down, and then attached another zip tie here to the bottom and brought that all the way across and tied it up right here. And then what I did from there was just push down on the tensioner and tighten up the zip ties, and that would just keep holding the slack that the tensioner has until I got it all the way down. Once I did that, we just went ahead and slid the tensioner between between the gears, and then installed the whole assembly back into the heads. This process is not easy by any means, but it's definitely doable, especially when you have the right tools and if you have some ingenuity like we did here with the zip ties. So let's get on to installing the rest of the parts for the heads. So here we have the cam caps, and you can see these are numbered 2 through 4 for the intake and the exhaust cams. Well, backwards, intake and exhaust, as well as the end caps, which we have here for both camshafts, and the end cap that we have here that goes on the opposite side of where the tensioner sits. We also have here a cam bore plug, again to seal up where the cam sprocket goes. So let's get these installed. Before we do install everything, we'll go ahead and do like we did before with the spray bottle of oil, and then just spray down the cams a bit just to make sure they're lubricated before we put the caps on. So right now we're going to thread in all the bolts for the cam caps and then start the torquing sequence after that. Now that we have all the bolts threaded in, we're going to start tightening down the cam caps, and we'll start from the center and work our way out in a crisscross pattern just to make sure we tighten everything down evenly. And at the end, we'll bring out the torque wrench and torque these all down to 7 foot-pounds. So now that the heads are all done internally, we'll get to cleaning the valve covers to get them installed, as well as the cam bore plug and the cam angle sensor. While we have the valve cover drying, we'll go ahead and unbox the gasket and get the gasket installed in the head. In this area here, where we have the dip between the two end caps, I like to add some black gasket sealant just to make sure we don't have any leaks. So we have the valve covers all cleaned up now. So last thing we'll do before we throw them on is go ahead and give the head a last spray down with some oil just to make sure we have lubrication. Okay, so now we'll throw the valve cover on. We'll grab all the nuts now and just hand tighten them on. We'll take the ratchet now and snug the bolts up, and we'll start from the middle. Now that we have all the nuts snugged up, we'll go ahead and torque them down, and we'll go about a half turn at a time just to make sure we tighten everything down evenly. Alright, so now we have the cam bore plug for the rear here. What I like to do with these is, first of all, oil it up a little, just so we have oil in the surrounding area to lubricate it while we're putting it in. I also like to grab a rubber mallet and a big socket. And why I use this is so I could get even pressure all the way around while we're hammering the plug in. So let's oil this up and then get started. Now we'll come around to the other side. And here we have to install the cam angle sensor. So we'll go ahead and place it in its spot here. We'll grab the bolts, thread these in, and we'll torque these down to 7 foot-pounds as well. And that is all. We now have a fully assembled head. Well, I hope you all learned something today, because I sure did. The rebuilding of the heads was a very involved process and one that I learned a lot from. There's a lot of little bits of knowledge and tips that will definitely help me in the future as I keep building on this platform. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, please drop a like. If you loved it, definitely subscribe. And if you want to keep up with day-to-day updates, make sure to follow me on Instagram. Peace. See you in the next one. So just to let you all know, my putting on the valve covers before this was all done was just for demonstration purposes. You definitely can't put on valve covers before you put the heads on the block, because you won't be able to put in the head bolts. So just keep that in mind.